at CU through my thesis. So in 2008, there were 16 million people that practiced yoga in America. In 2012, 4 years later, 20 million people practice yoga. It's about 1 million increase per year, and we're moving into 2015. So yoga is on the rise. It's quite exciting. So an ancient spiritual tradition collides with a capitalist economy. That's the title of my thesis. And here in the next 10 minutes, I'm going to describe a very brief history of yoga, how it's changed, and examine modern-day styles with regard to my main argument. As newer styles of yoga stray from traditional teachings, they become less beneficial to the practitioner. As a yoga practice that is more rooted in tradition is more beneficial to the practitioner than some Western forms, because newer modern styles tend to lack spiritual focus. So, the teachings of yoga. Yoga is based on the student-to-teacher relationship. That's key. The teachings of yoga originated around 500 BCE to 200 CEE from one person or a group of people we identify as Patanjali. We don't know if this is a human being, thus this image. And this is the image that is most commonly recognized as Patanjali. And Patanjali, he is recognized as the first who recorded the teachings of yoga, noted as the Yoga Sutras or the Eight-Limbed Path. And very briefly, the Yoga Sutras, there's about 195 threads or sutras that kind of describe very pithy little succinct, I can't pronounce that word, statements that embody yoga. Some of them come in one ear, out the other, and some are very straightforward. The Eight-Limbed Path are, as you can see on the screen, yama, moral observances, niyama, ethical observances, and there's 5 of each of those. Asana, which here in the modern world we know as postural practice. Pranayama, mindful breath control. And then further, they get a little more harder to conceptualize, I believe. Pratyahara is sensory withdrawal. Dharana is containership of our body. It's understanding of the body that we're living in. Dhyana, meditation. And further to the final, samadhi, full meditative absorption and connection to an ultimate source of something, God, if you will. So yoga, the word yoga, it comes from the Sanskrit word yuj, Y-U-G, which means union. Union. So, modern yoga originated in the late 19th century by Sri Tirumalai Krishnamacharya, pictured on the left in black and white. And his 2 students, middle and to the right, B.K.S. Iyengar and Pattabhi Jois, further expanded yoga to the West through their students. Now, each of these students offered their own significant deviation of postural practice, leading us into an expansion of modern yoga from Asia here into America. And so yoga now has become a commodity here in the West. I'll briefly discuss Bikram Choudhury, who teaches hot yoga. You may have heard of it, or Bikram yoga. He's a prime example of yoga as a commodity in the West he's well recognized for trying to copyright a set sequence of postures that was declined by the federal court. And he's also known for his luxury car collection and multiple lawsuits for other teachers trying to teach his own sequence. And why that's relevant is the light of yoga becoming a business. It's, please give me your money and I'll teach you yoga. And through this, yoga, it was created as a spiritual practice. But as the practice clashes with Western ideals and economics, the question then comes, can spirituality be solved? And so, corporate yoga. With the emergence of corporate yoga, yoga has become a fitness-based exercise practice with spirituality as an occasional aside. And so 2 of Pattabhi Jois's students, Brian Kest, pictured to the left, and Mr. Baron Baptiste, they took the inaccessible and very challenging postures of Pattabhi Jois's Ashtanga Vinyasa Yoga, and they made it relatable, they made it accessible to the general public by simplifying the practice. And so around the same time as this, 1980s and 90s, teachers in yoga studios began to use generated heat, music, and mirrors, further deviating away from our traditional postural practice, or the eight-limbed practice, if you will. And so this may have been a huge influence to the strong ideal of the Western body image, specifically the mirrors that you see when you go into a yoga studio. And so something to note here, a business's intention is to maximize profit while providing its service. Yoga's intention, union, self-transformation. So they clash. It's interesting. So there's a yoga guru, Patabi Joyce, who was concerned with this quote. It says, "Yoga is very good if it is taught with the correct method. Unfortunately, a lot of Westerners are thinking about making money than about teaching the correct method. I don't know how beneficial that can be for people. When yoga is only for business, it is of no use." And so, from here, yoga is now in magazines. It's in online yoga classes. Clothing companies have been exploding. Festivals and events. They're present. Yoga has morphed into a cultural phenomenon, and arguably it's one of India's largest cultural exports. Absolutely. And so, through here, yoga companies tend to shift from teaching the tools geared to the individual to making money and surviving in a capitalist economy. The pursuit of a profitable business centered on selling yoga may interfere with yoga's ability to provide a path for self-realization. And so, through that, there's a however, a big however. As we are able to lower the dogma surrounding yoga, we can reach more people. By reducing the dogma surrounding yoga and presenting physical postures in their simplest forms, yoga is able to reach more demographics. Here on the left, we have pictured BKS Iyengar in a very challenging advanced asana posture that is largely inaccessible to the yoga practitioners. To the right, we have a lower, more simplest forms of yoga that are being offered to minority groups and to children, and besides being able to offer to children, there's jails, there's army, hospitals, and low-income groups. There's so many organizations, non-profit organizations, that have come up through the spread of yoga by offering it in its most simple form, many of which here in Boulder. And so, as styles diverge from the eight-limbed path, or traditional yoga, as taught by Patanjali or Krishnamacharya, then it may be a steeper climb up an already lofty journey towards enlightenment. The businesses that focus on yoga as profit sometimes sacrifice the nectar of yoga to individuals. However, by introducing yoga in a simpler form, many people are introduced to the practice that may not have experienced it otherwise. In that way, I believe all styles of yoga seem to have their place in the modern world yoga society, and personally I believe I'm a key example of such. I had my first yoga class at Core Power Yoga on the Hill in a very simple way, in a simple manner. And now 3 years later, I'm blessed to be able to teach at Core Power and amongst other yoga studios here in Boulder. And I started out at a more simple understanding of what yoga was. When I first came to yoga personally, I was like, oh, this is exercise. And then I was inspired, and I had engaged into self-study. Thus this work that I have. Feel free to pass this around. This booklet, that's my thesis, and through that I watched a ton of demonstrations, and by that I mean as yoga was coming up in the 80s and the 90s, BKS Iyengar pictured, and Patabi Joyce, BKS recently passed, both are passed now, they made a ton of demonstrations as they were going through the West and through America of asana being postural practice, and through that I was inspired to perhaps have a demonstration and practice asana right here, and I imagine we're in a bigger room, so we might have to stand up as we can watch. What I'm going to demonstrate specifically is pictured a Surya Namaskar A and B in Patabi Joyce's Ashtanga Vinyasa system, and it involves the Vinyasa sequence of breath to movement, if you will, or the word translates to place in a sacred way, followed by, you'll note when the handstand comes, Iyengar, who was taught by Krishnamacharya, his own challenging sequence, which it's a fun sequence. So that's what I'm going to do. Okay, cool, great.
I have to. That's going to be enough?
I hope so.
Okay.
I don't kick anyone in the face. To the left.
I need to move this chair.
Q&A.
Better catch my breath. I didn't catch my breath.
The floor is open.
I'm exhausted already.
You get to see if you want.
More personal question than about your presentation, but as a practitioner and knowing so much about the transformation of yoga from east to west, how are you going to work to exemplify those 8 limbs rather than just focusing on one?
In my own
In your own teachings with your
teaching or personal practice?
teaching, because I feel like that's where it's lost mostly.
Totally. So I think in the last 3 years, I think the most relatable 3 limbs that can be taught in a 60-minute class, which is hard: asana, pranayama, and dhyana. So postural practice. That's, you go to any yoga class, you're going to practice asana. That's what modern day is. I think the next approachable limb to incorporate, I'm out of breath, is pranayama. So you heard my breath. That's the ujjayi breath that we use in yoga. And all of that leads into meditation. So Patabi, he says, yoga is 99% practice and 1% theory. So it's like being on the mat and incorporating as much as you can. And I think the next step, so if I had to include one theme, yama, the first teaching of yoga is ahimsa, nonviolence. It's quite straightforward, I believe. You know, nonviolence of my own thoughts, of my own actions, my own practice towards my own body. So that's how I incorporate it. Those 3 to 4 few limbs.